Come to me, oh come to me. Come to me, oh come to me. I want only thee, only thee. I want only thee. Oh my Jesus, come to me. Come, oh come to me. Come, oh come to me. Hello friends, and welcome to the noon broadcast of the unpublished writings of Paramhansa Yogananda, broadcast to you live weekdays, Monday through Friday, and then the recording is posted on our YouTube channel and on our Facebook channel for Ananda, Washington. Okay, well today I have been inspired to, thinking of the upcoming holiday and Christmas season, to take a selection from the collection of writings that Yogananda called The Second Coming of Christ. This was a series of articles that he wrote and published in his own magazine over many decades. Later, many decades later, were compiled and rewritten into a 2-volume book, and then later condensed into a 1-volume book by his organization. But the precepts of his Second Coming teachings on the life and teachings of Jesus Christ were summarized and very well articulated by Ananda's founder, Swami Kriyananda, in a series of books. There wasn't a series, but in various books, including the Revelations of Christ and including Promise of Immortality, along with a few other books. But anyway, what I'd like to talk about is baptism. After all, it sort of starts our spiritual journey, symbolically at least, starts with baptism. There are traditions east and west about the immersion into water, the use of water to symbolize baptism. Baptism is a kind of cleansing. Baptism is a kind of rebirth. And the tradition of immersion in water, Yogananda writes, the original ceremony of baptism by water came from India. And then his article that I'm using today quotes Matthew chapter 13, begins with verse 13. Then cometh Jesus to Jordan to John the Baptist to be baptized by him. But John refused to baptize Jesus, I'm paraphrasing here, because I, John said, have need to be baptized from you, Jesus. Why do you come to me? Jesus answered him and said, Let it be so for now, because we must fulfill all righteousness. And then John baptized him. Jesus, when he was baptized, and during being baptized, and went up straightway, came out of the water, and lo, the heavens were opened unto him, and he saw the Spirit of God descending in the form of a dove, and lighting upon him. And lo, a voice from heaven saying, This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased. Now, somewhere in here, he points out, he says, it is evident that Jesus, although he was so evolved, did not fail to go in the water. He was not fully immersed because the river Jordan was practically dry at that time. Now, how he knew that is open to speculation, but that's what he wrote. Sort of interesting. Now, cleanliness, he quotes, is next to godliness. I don't know where that little cliche came from originally, but what Yogananda is pointing out is the obvious, which is baptism of the body by water, unless followed by baptism of the mind by spirit, is practically meaningless. I think we all know that. It's questionable, for example, why you baptize an infant who has no ability to accept the baptism or affirm it, which is why in some Christian traditions there is what they call a confirmation of baptism, somewhere between the age of 7 and 14, I think, depending on the particular church you're in, as a reaffirmation, a consent, conscious consent by that person to the baptism. Well, it certainly has its good points. He says, where is it here? It's so sort of funny. A Hindu saint said to his would-be disciple, prior to immersing him in the Ganges, which is the great tradition in India, he said, "Son, it is necessary to bathe in the Ganges to purify the mind from sin. The sins will leave you temporarily only while you bathe in the sacred waters of the Ganges, but they will wait for you in the trees skirting the edge of the river, and as soon as you come out of the sacred influence of the holy water, they will jump on you again." And so the saint was acknowledging that mere bathing in the water was not really true baptism. Now it's interesting because in this article, and I've read it through several times, but I don't see that Yogananda really gets to the heart of the matter of his own teachings, which is that true baptism takes place in the astral body when we are baptized in the real river of life. The true river of life is the spine, is the Sushumna. And the true baptism takes place when we enter the state of breathlessness and are baptized in the holy water, so to speak, of prana, the sacred life force energy of prana, or chi as it's called in China. That is the essence of our inhabiting the physical body. Anyway, so he doesn't actually mention that, but that is his teaching elsewhere and throughout his teaching. Let me scan what else he says. He was sort of quaint. This was 1932 in his magazine East West, and he acknowledges that the aristocrats of society, who, in our culture, he says, most of us bathe daily. It wasn't quite true in 1930s, but it is certainly true now. But if you can imagine that in other cultures and in former times where daily bathing wasn't necessarily the case, it is somewhat the case in ancient India, but probably more among the Brahmins than others. In any case, the purpose of cleansing the body, the body does feel cleansed. There is a kind of cleansing even of the mind that takes place when we bathe. But those of us who shower every day, we sort of lose touch with that. But the ancient ritual of bathing before a sacred ritual has had for its purpose that the person probably really did need a bath. So he goes on here to talk about the aristocrats of American society who would turn their nose up to being immersed in a tub, such as they do in certain Christian sects. They would probably balk at being, because they already bathed earlier in the day, to being plunged into the water in their church. So he acknowledges that full immersion into water isn't really the essence of the baptism ceremony, okay? But he does go on to talk about, this part is interesting to me because it would seem that Yogananda's point of view about the baptism of Jesus by John somewhat evolved. I don't know that that's true, but in this article, he points out that, let me see, that Jesus went to John even though John said he was spiritually inferior, unworthy to baptize Jesus. Let's see. It's so confusing to read all this stuff. But in any case, he does acknowledge in here somewhere that in a prior lifetime, John the Baptist was the guru of Jesus in the form of Elias. Now, I don't have time to get into all of that. That's in the autobiography. But it's interesting to me that in this particular article, now this is part one. I think there's two more parts, which I'll read throughout this week, Wednesday and Friday. And maybe we'll find out more. But in any case, there is a deep relationship between the two of them. He decries the fact that in America, during his time, people or followed intellectual studies of their religion, but they weren't necessarily born again. Now, he doesn't use that phrase, born again. I'm using it as a shortcut to the kind of transformation of consciousness that is the true essence of baptism, because that leads him automatically into the teaching of guru-disciple. He says we can have many teachers, but only one guru, and no more teachers afterwards. Now, this is kind of a hard teaching for Americans of today who flit about like butterflies. The consciousness of America is loyalty is not a strong value in American society these days. We have many lovers, we have many marriages, we go from church. Many students I talk to, they went to church, from church to different church growing up as their parents sort of dabbled in religion. We're fickle. We are very much attached to the modern clothing fads, at least the young people are, mostly the young people that I know anyway. And so loyalty is not a strong trait, speaking in general, in American consciousness. So, and we find that as Padma and I train people to take discipleship in Kriya Yoga and to this line of masters, they really either don't understand or are resistant. Well, can I still practice my TM meditation after I take Kriya? Well, it's not that we make a rule and say you can't, but for heaven's sakes, why? You see, in other words, people don't have the refinement of consciousness in this society to understand that without having to be given a rule. We don't like to make rules, but for heaven's sakes, grow up. Okay. Let's see. And he quotes from his own Whispers Eternity from his poem about his guru. As a naughty baby, I cried for my mother divine, and she came to me as my guru. My guru, I found in you a response to my soul cries. And if all the gods, and here, he doesn't necessarily mean literally gods, but the gods of the intellect and the gods of different satisfactions, ideals that I have, are displeased and you are pleased, I am safe in the fortress of your acceptance. But if all the gods of success and materialism and health and wealth and public acclaim, fame, and name are pleased, but I don't have your blessing, then I am an orphan left to pine spiritually in the ruins of thy displeasure. And so the teaching that Yogananda brought, I don't want to say the teaching of India because it isn't that clear in India unless you have already some intuition and discernment, the clarity being that you need a guru to achieve enlightenment. There are many stories in India that point to this teaching, but in modern India today, they're just as fickle as Americans in terms of, being eclectic, I would say. Okay, I don't want that to be a critique. It's just not the consciousness of our times. Okay, and he goes on to explain the guru-discipleship relationship is not enslavement, which is what we tend to think nowadays, because we have this history of taking strict obedience, let's say, in monasteries or to a priest or a temple, having to follow all the rules. We're very rule-bound, especially in the West, historically speaking. And so that has kind of polluted our understanding of the freedom that a guru-disciple relationship offers to our soul. My guru said to me, allow me to discipline you, for freedom of will consists not in doing things according to the dictates of prenatal or postnatal habits or mental whims, but according to the suggestions of wisdom and free choice. If you tune my will to mine, you will find freedom. And this is an important principle. I see so many students, so-called disciples, even of our path, who just go from one, master tells me this, Babaji tells me that, and well, I'm all for it, but I don't necessarily see in their lives much wisdom or much loyalty, much adherence, in other words, to their sadhana or to their seva, etc. So they're just being butterflies. So to tune in with the soul whose will is guided by wisdom is to find freedom of will. Most teachers who slavishly control their students based on dogmatic teachings destroy the power of free will in the student, but obedience to a true guru does not produce blindness. On the contrary, it opens the third eye of wisdom and intuition. And sometimes a disciple spurns a true guru. This happens in the annals of discipleship. But in that case, it's spurning the help of one sent by God. It can be a long time in terms of future incarnations before that guru reawakens the contact. Well, I don't have time to go more of this. Jesus knew of the above law of emancipation, that we need a true guru to find enlightenment, because he must have found in John his reincarnated guru. Then in parentheses he says a guru, though inferior in spiritual quality, is a guru just the same, a vehicle of God always. Now that is a demanding sentence, because how can a true guru be inferior in spiritual quality? I have ideas on that, but I don't have time to go into it. And I think Yogananda's own explanations that he gave later might, I won't say contradict that, but let's just say refines that teaching. I think that's where I'm going to end. We're affirming the need for baptism, which is to say the need for immersion in superconsciousness. Immersion. No baptism happens until we have an inner experience of God. And that is what awakens. We need intuition. And as we develop that intuition, there will come into our life, sent by God, one who knows wisdom, a true guru. And does that guru need to be in a body? Well, we'll save that for another time. I better sign off. These are very deep teachings, and I hope some of you at least can appreciate them. God bless.